So this is what we're making, a pearl earring with a movable hoop. So these are 6mm half-drilled pearls. And they're drilled with a 1mm hole. Since these are earrings, match your colors. I usually buy a whole card of these when I buy, so there are color variations. So pick your best pair. Now, 0.8 round wire, and we're going to make a couple of cups to go on the back of the pearl, and they should be slightly smaller than the pearl, not a lot smaller, but a little smaller. And we'll cut a couple of discs and dome them. I'm using 0.5 fine silver, and the cutter is 6.3, and when we dome it, it'll get slightly smaller. So put the same thickness of metal opposite where you're cutting. It just keeps your cutter level. So tighten that down. Two of these discs. When you open up your cutter, if it doesn't release straight away, just kind of bounce it on the table and it'll free it up. Now, when you're doming, always make sure your punch fits in the hole with enough room for the thickness of the metal, and make sure that the disc fits in the depression. So don't let the punch hit the side of your doming block, or it'll put marks in the punch. Now we need to drill a 0.8 hole in our disc, so we're going to mark the middle of the disc with a center punch, and then we'll drill it with the 0.8 drill bit, because we want the wire to fit quite nicely. Now you can see, just by that little tap with the center punch, it's actually made a hole all the way through the disc, so it's quite easy to drill it. We just put that with the bump up on our bench peg, and I'm just taping it down so that we don't have to hold it with pliers or with our fingers. So a little bit of wax on your drill bit. You can use burr wax. I just use beeswax. And we spin this up before you approach the hole. It'll usually just drop right through. Now, we want to sand the edges of these just to tidy it up a little bit. So 400 grade paper on your bench, and you can just leave these on the masking tape. And just, if you can get it to turn you loose, There's just a little bit of that, and you should see a dull line all the way around the edge. That means that you've knocked the burr off from the cutter, and we're ready to solder. The masking tape just saves your fingertips. We'll cut 2 pieces of wire 60 mil long. You can change the length later on, and at this point we're not worried about the ends because we're going to solder one end, and the other end will probably change the length, and then we can file it and sand it at that point. Now, because you've cut your wire with your side cutters, and it's 0.8 wire and that's a 0.8 hole, you would have squeezed this into a slight oval, and I just take my number 2 cut flat hand file and slightly taper the end, and that'll get rid of that oval. It'll make it easier to put the wire in the pearl cup. Comme ça, and we're ready to solder. Now I have roughly 3 mil of wire sticking out of these. I'm just going to hold that in my third hand with the cup facing up, and this just makes it easy because the cup won't slide down the wire, it'll be level, all of that. I am going to use hard solder, and I'll move in so you can see. So just a small amount of flux. Make sure your flux is mixed up. And 1 small piece of hard solder. Just make sure it's sitting against the cup and the peg. Now we're dealing with fairly small material, so with the mini torch, about a 60-70 mil long gas oxy just until the orange goes out, and then we'll just circle this. We don't want to get the wire hotter than the cup, so they both need to be the same temperature. So there we go. Solder very nicely flowed. This one needs to get pushed into place with the solder pick. So just circle, and that way you don't overheat anything. Everything comes up to the same temperature at the same time. So quench this and pickle it. Now if you soldered this correctly, you should be able to see the meniscus, which is the curve of the solder between the 2 bits, here and on the back. So you should see a nice little curve of solder. If you can see it on both sides, then you've done it correctly. So at this point, we're going to check that our pearls fit. So you can see this one, the peg is slightly long. So cut it back. Just use your side cutters. Until the pearl sits nicely on the cup. Then we're just going to take our side cutters and gently nibble the material. And just to put a couple of little marks in it for the glue. So check it again. That's lovely. So that part is ready. So we're just going to take our chain nose pliers, grab it as close to the cup as you can, and we're going to bend it 90 degrees. So now we're ready to assemble it in our hoop, like the ones we made earlier. So this will be like that, and it's far enough away from the chenier that the hoop will turn. Now this will turn about a third of the way. If you wanted it so that it would turn all the way, what you have to do is space that down with chenier. Yeah, and in that way it'll turn past the pearl cup. Up to you. I think that'll be quite nice the way it is. So what we're going to do now is form the rest of our wire for our earring. Then we'll polish the whole thing, and we set the pearl last. So we're using our flat round pliers for this, and once again, if you mark your pliers, then you can bend everything the same. So what I'm going to do is use the small mark on these. So I'm just resting it on the chenier. Bend that 45 degrees towards me. Then we shift that to the other side of the pliers. And then up and around the round part of the pliers, so you can see how this will hang with our pearl peg forward. Now you can cut this length to whatever you want, and normally it would be 30 mil long. So we'll cut that with the side cutters. File it flat with your number two cut flat hand file. Sand it, and you're just sanding the end of the wire. Don't hit your hoop. And then I'll take a little polishing wheel on my handpiece and just polish the very end. So you wouldn't have to measure your second ear wire. You can just put it next to the first one, cut it the same length, tidy up the ends, and we're ready to polish them. Now I'm going to harden the hoop just by gently plenishing, and the hoop is the only part that I'm concerned about. It will harden in the tumbler, but it's so easy to just tap that bit just to make sure. Don't kill it, just gently tap it. Well, that was only 15 minutes in the tumbler, and they disassembled themselves, which means that these curves are all gentle enough that they'll go through the chenier. So I can glue my pearls on and then just assemble them in the earrings. Now I'm using a Post-it note to mix my glue on. It just makes it easier because you don't have to worry about the note sliding around. And we're using 5-minute epoxy. So just a dot of each. And we've already checked the depth of the wire in the pearl, and we've already nibbled the wire a little bit so that the glue has a place to stick. So an equal amount of each of these. mix it thoroughly. And I'm just using a cocktail toothpick. And just a tiny amount on the end of the wire. And I put a little drop right on the hole of the pearl, push it down in a little bit, and that's all it needs. So then we'll just slip that on, make sure it's seated, and give it 5 minutes. So do both of them. I'm just using my double third hand to hold these so that the pearl peg is straight up and down, and it just so that these will stay in position until the glue sets. So always leave your glue stick in your paper so that you can tell whether the glue's actually gone off or not. Once it's gone off, we'll assemble our earrings. And we'll just put that to the inside. So that's it. That's our movable hoop with a pearl earring. Once again, one of those things that you can modify to make it whatever you want. And the nice thing, by using the 1mm inside diameter chenier and the 0.8 wire, is that you can slip your main earring in and out. So you could have different things on your ear wire and use the same hoop. Ciao.